Welcome. I'm Steve,
I'm Kevin.
and this is Nerds Talk. We're going to talk about. Well, actually, before I tell you what well, you know what we're going to talk about by the title, don't you? But 15,
Spoilers.
15 minute cities. But what I want to do is, in the lead up to talking about the 15-minute cities, what I want to do is just just go through each decade since World War II on the types of fears that society has had.
Are you going to include spiders in this?
No, this is kind of
Yeah.
uh, world fears, economic fears. Like a kind of the thing that most people are like, oh my god, you hear on the news, oh my god, those kinds of fears. Um,
Yeah, I'd be scared of sharks and piranhas.
yeah, well, yeah,
Because
you're
the
right. Actually,
TV.
you're right. You're right. Actually, I've made a note of that. But I don't know whether it's just because I'm getting older or it's because I'm just more aware of things. But over the last few years, I feel that there's been a lot of scaremongering going on.
You think? You've taken the red pill, haven't you?
Maybe, I don't know. I still try and stay as balanced as possible, but how can you? Anyway, I've decided to look at sort of 10-year blocks from World War II. So in the 1940s, obviously it was the end of the war. That ended in 1945. So naturally, people were scared of another war. That
Yeah.
makes sense. And generally, they were uncertain about the future. Makes complete sense, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
the Cold War was just beginning, and
Uh-huh.
there was a threat of a nuclear war, specifically between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time. There was the fear of the dangers of new technologies, but not just the atomic bomb, but also jet airplanes.
And don't forget, you also had the beginning of the whole UFO fears from Roswell, which was around that time.
Well, yeah, but we've talked about this though, haven't we? Because interestingly, that came up as a news flash, and as soon as it came up, it was dumbed down and forgotten about. So it wasn't until decades later that everyone really started talking about it. So that's an interesting, wasn't it, isn't it? And it's interesting how that came about at around the same time that the atomic bomb was developed.
Yeah.
Interesting, but there was a fear of disease because
Really?
diseases like polio,
Oh,
tuberculosis,
of course, yes. Yeah. There was all sorts of outbreaks of diseases out then.
yeah, and the flu. People were scared of the flu.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
they
just shows
still
how
are.
long.
Uh,
Sorry, go on.
They still are controversial.
Yeah, but it shows you how far we've come along, doesn't it? Like the flu was like, oh god, got the flu. I'm going to be in bed for 2 weeks, and nobody really thinks about it as something to be scared of. Not now, anyway.
Yeah, something's got to kill you, hasn't it?
That's true. Because also there was a fear of natural disasters, such as
Oh,
hurricanes
yeah.
and earthquakes.
You can see that those fears manifesting itself in the cinema of the time, like Tower and Inferno and all these
Mhm.
other big disaster films that was out at the time, playing on people's actual fears for the time.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. But you do start to see the how the film industry, um, and later on even how the news and social media starts to creep in and kind of explode all of these fears. But I mean, in the 1940s as well, and this makes sense as well because it was after the war. But people were also had a fear of fascism, specifically from Italy and Germany, because that led to World War II. So there was still that ongoing fear that, oh, this might cause another war. We might have to go through all that again. And then you move into 1950s, and the Cold War is in full swing. So of course, continuing fear of nuclear war,
Yeah, I
and
remember being scared of that in the 80s.
yeah, and the development of thermonuclear weapons made the possibility of global annihilation even more real to everybody. And there was uh, also a heightened fear which was kind of through the 40s and 50s, of communism from the
Oh, yeah.
Soviet Union and
I've
China.
never understood that. Why were people scared of communism? It's like, well, if you don't like that way of life, don't adopt it then. Like, what? Do
Well,
they
what
think
there
it was
was,
going to take over or something?
yeah, because with through China as well, what they were scared of. So a lot of people at the time believed that communists were trying to infiltrate American institutions, and
Uh,
and this led to actors and I think scientists and all kinds of people being blacklisted, where they were if they were suspected of being a communist, damn commies, then yeah, they were being blacklisted,
so
cancelled.
this is interesting that you bring this up because, oh my God, their communism is infiltrating governments and has this real risk of it all. Is this what like we're scared of with the World Economic Forum, infiltrating governments and trying to bring about a form of communism again, owning nothing and being happy? So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the same thing, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's another rise of. It's the same fear,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, it's yeah, because yeah, they're bringing about the same fears repackaged, but essentially it's the same, which is why I'm beginning to have my doubts that the Great Reset and all that, like, is this just another tool they've got to get you scared to make you embrace the government structure that you've got now for fear of losing that by giving you a fear of something worse?
Yeah,
Deep.
yeah. Deep. As we go through the years, though, you'll start to
Yeah, oh,
see
yeah,
that
yeah. I'm skipping ahead.
how it's no, but if you've identified as soon as we start talking about this, you straight away identify. Hold on a minute, that's not much different from now.
Yeah.
And this was the 1950s. This is a long time ago. I wasn't. We weren't born then. So, but yeah, also around that time, um, there was a fear of juvenile delinquency. Not
Yeah.
obviously not to the levels of juvenile delinquency of now. Well, I wouldn't even say nowadays. I mean, because I've got two young kids, I get to go to uh, skate parks and like all places where kids hang out. And if I compare now the way kids are now to my upbringing back then,
Oh,
um, kids are so much nicer. Kids are
yeah.
so much nicer. It's unreal. Anyway, so there was a fear of juvenile delinquency. Kids getting out of control, and social media. I'm saying no, sorry, the media got. There wasn't a social media really back then, was it? But media reported on gang violence and crime by young people, and people got very scared of.
Clockwork Orange.
Sorry, clock. Oh yeah,
Clockwork Orange. That well, that was clearly on preying against cinema, preying on the fears of the general population of these violent gangs walking around.
when was Clockwork? So Clockwork Orange came out in
About
1970.
69, I think. About 1969. It's a Kubrick film. Came out after. Oh, it might be. I think in either 1969 or 1970. Fact check that.
Anthony Burgess, 1962.
Oh, that was when the book was written.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So we're a decade ahead, but we're just about to go into that decade. So here, 1960s, Clockwork Orange. People were scared. Basically, people were scared of the same things as the 1950s because there was the threat of nuclear war continuing. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis at the time.
yeah.
There was there was also a fear of social change because there was like the civil rights movement. They were challenging the status quo, and then they had Vietnam War, which was apparently deeply unpopular. And again, people believe that the Vietnam War is something that could lead again to the US and the Soviet Union having a bigger war. So
Well,
that just feeds again into the fear of nuclear war.
again, that's interesting. You said about social changes and civil rights coming through, and people scared of that. What have you got now? The whole gender issues that is swamping society
Yeah,
and bringing out social change that people are thinking are fighting against.
yeah. The culture war, that's what they're
Yeah,
calling it.
the culture wars. Yeah, they always bring it around.
Yeah. But on top of that, there was drug culture, fear of drugs and violence. You had like people smoking marijuana and doing LSD.
Drugs ban, okay.
Drugs are bad and kind.
Drugs ban, okay.
So people,
Ban, okay.
so people feared an addiction, and and that would lead to social decay.
Ah.
But there was also like a counter culture movement as well. So there's more. Everything is just like by the 1960s, there is just this. It looks like just a big tumbleweed of getting bigger and bigger of oh my God, social disorder, breakdown of society. We're all going to die.
Yeah, and if you look at the stuff that people were writing at the time, like their sort of futures were always in science fiction painted really grim, but it wasn't set in years too far away from where they were, like 1984.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, Blade Runner was set in what, 2019,
Yeah. No.
and that's dystopian.
Yeah. We always seem to have this. We mentioned it before. Like everyone's kind of like the end is nigh, and we used to think, oh, that's a nutcase on the corner, or like conspiracy theorists. But we've come into. We'll talk about this in a second, but we're kind of coming into an era where we're accepting that we're so knowledgeable. Social media has really helped us to really understand. It's helped and it's hindered as well. It's helped a lot of people understand the truth or just get information a lot quicker. So it doesn't take 50 years before the truth comes out. It takes what, 6 months?
Yeah, and you could discuss it with a wider range of people rather than your
Yeah,
circle that will probably all have the same views as you.
yeah. But it also means that you can spread a fear a lot quicker as well. And spreading a fear is not going to take 6 months. It's going to take 3 days
Yeah.
or a day. So yeah, it's interesting. Then we'll move into the 1970s, and again, nuclear war, as you'd
Oh, yeah.
expect.
It's always
The,
looming.
yeah, the Vietnam War was still going on, and then there was the rise of terrorism because there was. I need to look this up because I don't know a lot about it, but there was the Munich Olympics massacre, and then there was the hijacking of an airplane. It was a TWA flight 841. Um, then in 1973, there was the oil crisis, which actually began. We kind of led to an awareness of environmental issues, the environmental crisis, and the fear of pollution, and then the loss of natural resources. And that was at that time we were like, oh my God, we'll run out of oil in 20 years. You know, that
Oh
kind
yeah,
of.
I remember panicking about like, oh my god, we're gonna run out of oil. I remember
Yeah,
that panic in the 90s actually. I was like thinking, lying awake at night, thinking, what happens when the oil's running out?
yeah.
And then here I am 30 years later, and they're still pumping out gallons of the stuff.
Yeah, and it seems to me that, I mean, some people believe that there's actually an infinite amount of
Yeah,
oil. We.
I've read into that.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to go into it all now, but they basically think that oil is basically the lubrication that the Earth creates for the continents to kind of shift around and move. It's like a sublayer that's naturally produced by the Earth over and over, rather than the idea of its rotted down remains of dinosaurs, which would make it a limited, finite supply.
Oh, that's it.
But
I'm
if
not sure
you
about that one, but
well, if you want to add value onto something, you make it a finite supply.
yeah,
And so your oil is finite, that's why it's got value. Well,
yeah,
it's like diamonds aren't actually rare. It's just that they kind of make the supply that they restrict the supply of diamonds because it's just minerals under the earth,
yeah,
glass at high pressures.
yeah. And if
I
you,
digress, though.
well, more recently, I can't remember if it was just early this year or late last year. China found more oil deposits, and then there was a fear that people would buy from China rather than buy from Russia, and the whole mix of like the Ukraine war and uh,
I,
oil and gas. Oh,
I always think like that. I see how many cars fill up at petrol stations on a daily basis and how many gallons are being used per day. And I think surely that should have run out by now or getting near to the end of it all.
yeah,
But it doesn't seem to be. Because if it was coming towards the end, I'm pretty sure society would be looking for alternative means and pushing out more than what they are now.
yeah. You would think,
Mm.
but that's what the whole climate crisis is about as well, though, isn't it? But let's not go in depth on that. But that's something that kind of comes later because once everyone's got these fear of like, oh, this is going to be an environmental crisis, we're going to run out of oil. My God, pollution. We never thought about that. Um, they started becoming more aware of other things like the harms of pesticides.
Yeah.
And they were like the harm. This had kind of built up for sort of 20, 30 years. They've been using pesticides, and then they realized that they're really harmful to people. Surprise.
Yeah.
But
Like
then also
asbestos, you can't use that anymore.
exactly. Why
It's
not?
such a versatile material. It
Yeah.
kept the heat, insulated well.
As long as you don't saw into it or something and breathe in the bits, you're all right.
Didn't cigarettes used to be made out of asbestos as well or
I'm
something?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the filter had asbestos in it.
Yeah.
It's terrible. But also in the 1970s, because there wasn't wasn't the 1970s like the decade of love, or was that the 60s? Was that the
No,
60s
it's
into
a
the
swinging
70s?
60s of love and everything.
Yes.
70s, what was the
Well,
70s? It's kind of that in between era,
in,
isn't it? Where you've got the
yeah.
hippie movement of the 60s sort of fade out.
Well, what you find here is the consequence of the swinging 60s because everyone starts being more aware of sexually transmitted diseases
Yeah.
and especially diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea. So fear around sexually transmitted diseases.
Oh, and yeah, I was going to say what you said earlier about people were more scared of diseases. Remember the bloody scary stuff in the 80s of AIDS?
Yep,
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
going to
we
get
haven't
to
come
that.
to the 80s yet.
Yeah, we haven't got to the 80s yet.
Well, we mid 70s,
Mid 70s, yeah. We had,
Ice Age.
oh, the big freeze, yeah. Everyone, there was,
I
the
remember that, the big freeze. We're going to freeze. There's a new ice age coming. Global cooling.
yeah, that was on the cards, wasn't it? We were on the
Yeah.
precipice of another natural disaster. How can we stop this?
I remember there was where I lived on Sheppey. I can't remember what year it was, but I remember the sea had frozen over. The actual sea had frozen. It was so
Amazing.
cold one winter.
Well, there's quite a few big freezes, and I think it was 1962, 63. There was a really famous big freeze in the UK. There's been a couple around the world, but apparently a really, really famous big freeze, which lasted a while. Yeah, 1963, something like that.
Yeah.
Not that I mean that didn't cause anyone to think of climate change or anything, but that's because it wasn't until the 70s that people started becoming more aware of um like pollution and natural kind of disaster sort of thing scenarios. But they also on top of that there was the fear of terrorism was that continued from terrorism and the fear of technology.
Uh-huh.
And so a couple of decades before that there was the fear of technology, and that was uh and people, but technology was like the atomic bomb and jet airplanes. Okay, now we're into the 70s. Technology is a little bit different. It's because it's the beginning of like computers, isn't it?
They'll take your job off you. That computer's going to do your job better.
Yep. Actually, that fear didn't kick in for another couple of decades, not properly anyway. But also on top of all of this, so the fears just are building up decade upon decade. We're just piling more and more fear on top of fear on top of fear. We started fearing serial killers because
Did we? Well,
yeah,
you should fear serial killers anyway. I mean, that's just one of
but
those logical things that, yeah.
yeah, but no, nobody had been that aware of serial killers before. It's not something that everyone kind of thought about because during the 70s, people left the doors open. It didn't really, you know what I mean? Everyone felt a lot safer or maybe just didn't think about, you would let your kids, very young kids, just run off and play. See you later.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Come back
yeah,
before it's dark, sort of thing.
you'd let your little Billy go run off and play with Jimmy Savile. Didn't think anything of it.
Yeah. But then I think it's more to do with people beginning to have more and more people begin to have TVs in their house, and they can start to see what's on the news, what's actually happening across the world, across the country. And so Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, these kinds of stories started creeping up, and all of a sudden people are like, "Holy moly! There's serial killers. There's people out there hunting for
What
your kids.
what
They're going to
decade
murder you in your
was
sleep."
John Wayne Casey, the clown killer guy? Was he 60s or
I think
something?
that was 60s. This is why I'm saying I think it was the fears of serial killers was because just more people had TVs in their home. They were able to watch things.
Yeah.
Let me just check. Wayne Casey, see what.
I've got a feeling he was
Oh,
60s.
yeah.
But he had
I
a
think
long period. Dharma as well. Don't forget the famous one,
yeah,
Dharma. Yeah, you had quite a lot of really horrible serial killers that would bury their bodies in their houses
yeah.
like that and eat them.
What's interesting about that is we we go from the 70s, everyone being really scared of serial killers, to everybody watching all of the serial killer programs that are on TV.
Yeah.
Like a sick fascination now. But anyway, then we move into the 80s, and then once again, nuclear war. It's just a common theme throughout.
Yeah, I remember being scared in the 80s that Russia were going to bomb us.
Yeah, and again, I think because through the 80s, pretty much everybody had a TV by that point. I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah.
No matter how small it was, not like today's TVs, but everybody had a TV, and they could see these things on TV. Suddenly, you could see a picture of a nuclear blast, and I think that is the thing that really kind of ignites the fear in your brain. It's something that you might go to sleep and dream about because you've
And
seen it.
that's funny. Have a look at some of the nuclear blast footages that they've got from like the 50s and that.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like model work. So
Oh
did
yeah.
they do a terrifying image of what your nuclear weapon's going to do to you, and they had like model villages being blasted away?
Well, that's an interesting conspiracy, isn't it? There is no such thing as nuclear weapons. It's just a thing we made up. Never
It's
been
like
able to
to
make them.
scare you with.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be another topic. I think that'll be our top
Yeah.
conspiracy theory podcast.
I wonder if any.
Yeah, that's next.
What makes me wonder if anyone's made that conspiracy up. Oh, I've actually never heard that one.
Oh
Anyway,
no, there is, to be fair. I was reading that people are saying that the effects of nuclear weapons is faked. That the models of these villages being destroyed is all faked because it's clearly models. And they said what destroyed Hiroshima was just extremely large normal bombs.
oh, that's an
But
interesting thing.
that's a whole nother subject you could go down a rabbit hole on, and I haven't done
Definitely.
enough research into that one at this moment.
Oh, well,
But
yeah,
it's fascinating, though, that it's a way of like, well, make you fear nuclear war.
yeah. And
So if you believe the other side believe that you've got a weapon that can wipe the world out, and that side lets you believe they could wipe the world out, you've got that stalemate, haven't you? Even
yeah,
though they don't know for certain if they actually have it, and they don't know for certain if they've actually got it.
yeah, exactly. God,
Anyway, we're on to
we,
the
we,
80s.
we could go on UFOs and all kinds of stuff and unidentified aerial phenomena and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, 1980s, weapons of mass destruction being used in warfare, and that
Oh.
because that included the use of chemical weapons by Iraq against Iran during the Iran-Iraq war. That was all through the 80s actually.
I don't remember much of hearing about that one.
I think just too young.
Yeah, I was too young at that point because I didn't really find it. I got my news source from John Craven's Newsround at 5:05 on Children's TV.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I say it is, all my life, I feel like there's been an Iraq war.
Yeah, no, I remember being terrified of the Iraq War in the 90s, thinking, "Oh my God, they're going to throw weapons of mass destruction at us."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we've always had some kind of Middle Eastern bloody war.
Yeah, and then there was the rise of tech again. People started fearing technology. Oh my God, what's going to happen? These things are take our jobs and all that. Then we had because of movies. Movies became even more massive in the 80s, didn't they?
Oh, that was a golden era of Hollywood.
Yeah, and then so there was a lot of horrors. I remember I loved horror. I still do love horrors, obviously. In fact, I did want to tell you about a horror that I watched recently, but I'll leave that to later. But yeah, that people were scared of clowns, satanic panic they called it.
Oh, actually, you're right. I remember as well, because that links into like with Dungeons and Dragons. There was a big fear that that's encouraging kids to worship the devil and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the fight and fantasy books. I remember there was that book, House of Hell. I mean, the title didn't help, but parents, and they named a lot of the rooms within the House of Hell after actual devils, like Diablo rooms and stuff like that. And that, yeah, they were scared. So there must have been something that was scaring people about devil worship in the 80s.
Yeah, horror films, and then there was films like Run with the Devil, and then people started blaming heavy metal groups for trying to link them with Satanism, but then also people were scared of sharks and aliens.
I was scared of sharks because of Jaws.
Yeah,
And I've watched the film Piranha, I think.
yeah,
And I thought that if there's piranhas in the water you go in, they're going to eat you, rip your flesh bare.
yeah.
They always have a Sheppey. There were no sharks or piranhas.
they always have a little bite first, or they always have a little nibble first. But generally, piranhas will stay away from you. They're not. They're not evil, crazy, psychopathic fish.
But like with all of my information from the 80s, I got from TV and film.
Exactly.
Like my history, I've learned from Carry On films and Blackadder.
Yeah. Which is probably as accurate as any book you'll read.
More entertaining.
More entertaining, yeah. But then also through the 80s, there was, I remember they used to talk about save the trees. We need to save the trees. We created too much paper. We're chopping down trees, destroying rainforests.
Oh yeah, the Amazon forest is going to be gone in 10 years.
Yeah. And then there's a hole in the ozone.
Yeah,
which
that terrified me. Like, oh my God. They basically said it's not repairable. It's going to get worse, and greenhouse gases are just going to kill us all off within years.
I can remember there was a big thing in the 80s about CFCs, and it was about, they talked about hairsprays and all sorts, and they had to ban. I think they did ban CFCs in the end in the UK. Did, and yeah, just so you can see fear pile on top of fear, on top of fear, on top of fear, and then you had the AIDS pandemic, the AIDS epidemic through.
Oh, that terrified 80s. Me. I was like, what, 10? Why would that have terrified me at 10? I didn't even understand how you caught it. I just remember the advert on the telly. It had this terrifying. It was a gravestone, and it panned up the gravestone, and it said, "AIDS can kill you." And I was like, "What the hell? How do I catch that, or how do I avoid that?" I remember, like, they said, use a condom. And I asked my parents, like, "What's a condom?" "Oh, I don't know. Shit, I'm going to die because I haven't got a condom.
I need to get a condom, quick.
I'm going to get a condom or I'll get AIDS.
But yeah, like I said, TV is the old mobile phone, social media. It's just an older version of that. But you got your information a lot less quickly. Things were researched properly before they were shown on TV. And then we moved into the 1990s. Again,
I don't know much about the 90s.
You don't remember much, did you say?
No, I remember. No, I remember the Gulf War being a big thing. But what else were they scaring us in that?
Well, there was nuclear war.
Oh, there's always nuclear.
There's always nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean the AIDS thing I'd got over. Not that I had AIDS and got over AIDS, but the fear of AIDS I got over. I think I was scared of the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq at the time, but after a year of that, it just became background noise.
Yeah. Well, even after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that was in 1989, people still feared a nuclear war. But then films freaked people out about nuclear war. We had during the 90s there was quite a few disaster films. I watched one. Which one is it? The one that had a huge tidal wave that like wiped out a whole city, like New York or something.
Is this like a 90s film?
Yeah, it was like a late 90s.
The only one I can remember, but it's too modern, is The Day After Tomorrow.
Um, oh,
Yeah.
that could have been the early 2000s then, couldn't
That
it?
was early 2000s.
Ah, right.
That was about a big tidal
Yeah.
wave wiping
Well,
everything.
you did have the movie Threads. You've mentioned this before.
Oh yeah, it was a nuclear. That was an
Yeah,
80s thing. Was that an 80s thing? Threads?
I believe that was early 90s, I think.
Hmm.
I'd have to check. I'd have to double check. And then you had the rise of terrorism again, and the threat of technology. Because remember the Millennium Bug, the
Oh,
Y2K is
Millennium
coming.
Bug, of course. I was in the late 90s when I worked in computers. I was a year 2000 compliance um, person. So I had to make sure that all the computers at work weren't going to blow up when it ticked over to 2000. They didn't. Well, that turned out to be a load of rubbish, didn't it?
Yeah, but another fear, and it's kind of irrational. Like
Yeah.
how is it possible? Like I just never. Even at the time, I didn't quite understand that. I was like, okay, so uh, computers have not been made to handle the 2000 digits or something. Once it gets past the 1999, clicks over to 2000.
Which
The,
means it's an earlier date and it'll be like, oh, I can't cope and blow up your engine or something.
yeah, just I don't know. So also during the 90s, there was this widening gap between the middle class and the poor.
Yeah.
So there became a fear of economic insecurity. I'm pretty sure in the 90s, violence in places like New York City was horrendous. We're probably back to those levels now, aren't we? But
Yeah.
yeah, there was like economic insecurity and social instability again. And then once again, people were talking about environmental stuff. We had acid rain,
Oh, I
global
remember
warming.
that. Oh, was the 90s was the start of the global warming stuff, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
That
they
escalated through the 90s. Then it sort of, then you had a period of normal weather and they shut up, but they changed it to climate change and then they shut up about it and now they brought it back. I'd say in the last 6 years, it's reared up again that people are like, we're going to boil to death suddenly.
yeah, we're all going to drown, and and we'll burn to death as well.
Oh, I remember when I went to the Maldives about 2007 ish.
Hmm.
And it was like, oh, it's the last time you're going to get a chance to go and visit the Maldives because of the rising sea levels. They're going to wipe out the Maldives in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
You can still book holiday to go there.
See, I think
Mm.
there's a lot of fear, like I said earlier, fear mongering. Then we
Yeah.
go on, then we go into the 2000s, and you had the war in Iraq with weapons of mass destruction again.
Oh, God, it's deja vu.
Yeah. Um, Also disease. SARS was a big thing, a big worry for people then,
Uh-huh.
and cyber warfare. That was something that was being talked about a lot more. We had 9/11,
Yeah.
7/7 in this
Oh,
country.
hang on a minute. No, think about 9/11, of course. That was 2003. The early 2000s was dominated by terrorism, wasn't it?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that's what most people were focused on. They brought out a lot of the extra controls at airports. So, yeah,
yeah,
I think it was a terrorism threat in the 2000s, early 2000s.
yeah. And also through 90s into 2000s, there was there was a lot of fear of crime. I remember that.
Yeah.
So now once we get to the 2010s, we start hearing more about how plastics are killing the planet. So we need to stop chopping the trees down again. We've we switched from paper to plastics, and plastics seem to be far worse for the planet than chopping down trees ever was. So and
And
by
it's
the way, nobody ever stopped chopping down trees. So
No, I've always thought the simple solution to all this climate problem is just to plant loads more trees and create a massive island in the middle of the ocean, just of a forest that you cover half the planet with trees.
yeah, um, and then everyone starts talking about climate change. So we've gone through the big freeze to um, you know to global warming to now we're looking at climate change. Um, and also people started to really realize and start to talk about the rise of social media and the spread of misinformation, and especially, I think from 2016, so time.
2016 with the Trump, because Trump came up with the slogan "fake news."
Yeah,
So everyone's like, "Oh, it's fake news, fake news. Everything you're
yeah,
seeing is fake news." So if they're trying whatever they're reporting and it doesn't fit in with what that person wants, they label it as fake news and misinformation.
yeah.
That
People,
was 2016, all that happened.
exactly, and then people start talking about loss of jobs through automation. That's been something that has probably become more of a fear for people. But also the rise of populism and nationalism, which has like led to political polarization, and then the culture war, which we mentioned earlier. Uh,
Yeah, definitely the culture war at the moment.
yeah, it's something that we're going through. But that all started 2000. That started with Trump, I think, or maybe a little bit
Yes, it
earlier.
was. I think it all seemed to go a bit weird, particularly in Hollywood as well. I think with
Mhm.
Epstein and all that lot, and Weinstein, Weinstein, or whatever his name is,
Yeah.
it created the Me Too movement that then created like kind of the third wave feminism movements, and then that's evolved into like the gender arguments.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's been non-stop gender wars and culture wars for
Yeah.
like 2016.
Yeah.
It was like their response to Trump being elected. Like, how have you elected Trump? And then all the other stuff coming out in the media, like Savile and all that lot came out.
Yeah.
That would have been 2015-ish, Savile.
Maybe I thought it was sooner, earlier. Sorry.
I'm not
Mm.
sure now. Is that Op Utri and all that? Like all these people that are actual predators and paedophiles.
Yeah. Are you still there?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
I worked out when Savile was. I don't think it might have been 2010. I think it was fairly recent-ish all that came out.
Yeah. I'd have to look at that. But also something that I don't know if you remember the Zika virus.
No, I don't remember that one.
It was so I remember it, but there was a fear of mosquito-borne viruses, and I did a little article not that long ago, well, probably a year ago now, on genetically modified mosquitoes. Because anyway, they're doing it in different places in America and I think some places in Europe as well. I can't remember exactly where now, but yeah, this whole sort of fear of viruses, mosquito-borne viruses, and this is leading us now nicely into the 2020s right now, and here we are with
But
pandemic,
you're not
vaccines.
allowed to mention the C word, though. I don't think you can mention any of that, or you'll be censored.
All right. Oh, okay, okay, okay.
So we'll talk about that virus that begins with C and ends in V.
So we got pandemic, viruses, war in Ukraine, threat of nuclear war again, climate crisis,
Yeah.
fear of artificial intelligence. I think I'm saying
Oh,
this in order that has
yeah, you
happened.
are. And
Um,
then,
and now this has kind of led to loss of privacy, control, authoritarianism. People are talking about
oh,
the Chinese way of life, the Chinese authoritarianism
do you know?
leaking into today's society, and all of the Western world becoming authoritarian, talking about globalism, a global state to control the masses. Oh my God!
There's a fear, I think, a growing fear and mistrust of government now. So
Mm,
people are so like don't know what the truth is anymore because there's so many different bits of information flying around that you don't know who to trust. Because it's not like, right, what are the government telling us? What's the deal here? And no one's trusting what the government are saying and having to go and find alternative ways to find out what's true and what isn't. So
yeah,
I think there's a growing mistrust of government.
yeah, you're right. But where's all this leading? You've got less and less people buying into the narratives, not trusting what politicians say, not trusting what news outlets say. Or,
I I think that so the World Economic Forum, which we touched on earlier, and the whole idea that they want to bring about a world with the Great Reset where you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, you rent everything, you don't own your own house, you won't be able to drive anywhere because only certain people will have like self-driving cars and all that. And I think that's created to make people go, oh, that sounds really horrendous. I'm scared of that. What are the government going to do to stop that happening? So to push you back to wanting to keep the government that you've got now that you mistrust.
Maybe.
Because there's something worse around the corner than us. Do you want to give up your house for the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset?
Exactly. Do you think though that we've evolved to this place where we rely on the government for far too much?
Yes, because if there's an energy crisis, like with, oh my God, I can't afford to pay my energy bills, what are the government going to do about it? Oh my God, my interest rates are going up. How are the government going to help?
Yeah.
It's doing stuff to make us try and creating a problem for us to then say, what are you going to do about this to the government?
Yeah.
That are probably the ones that create the problem in the first place.
Yeah. And now you're seeing a lot of sensible people starting to rise up and create their own little communities to look after themselves, distribute local food and all kinds of stuff going on where people are, they're kind of pushing against that now. I still think you've got the majority of people who are, I don't know if it is the majority. You've got a large set of people who still are convinced by a narrative, are very, very trusting of what they hear on the TV. And then you've got a whole load of other people who are kind of hidden. Really, nobody really talks about them, but they're all doing stuff to set themselves up, look after themselves. You've got people that think that there's a coming food shortage, like massive global food shortage, and we're going to have to really look after ourselves.
Yeah, and I'm just beginning to think, looking back on that whole topic you've just gone through, I was just thinking, all of the fears that we've had throughout from what the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, none of that's really come to pass.
Yeah.
So I just think, right, you look back in history, you think, I've lived through all this. They're just repeating the same, repackaging and churning out the same fears decade after decade.
Yeah, I'm glad you've noticed that, and that's why I think it was useful just to go through the decades and just have a quick kind of look at what the fears were during each decade and how it's led to this point. And like I said, to me, it feels like they've compacted fear on top of fear, and people who are older might remember the times, from years ago when they were scared of something. They might still be scared of the same thing, and then a bit more fear has been piled on top of it, and put a bit more fear on top of that, a bit more fear on top of that. And I don't know, are we headed for a global government seeking to outright control the masses through authoritarianism? And like a lot of people believe.
No, I honestly genuinely think now, because I was getting really worried about it all, and I'm thinking, no, for example, the World Economic Forum aren't making a secret about their hidden agenda and their plans about wanting to push people into their way of thinking,
It's
which
not
makes
hidden.
me think that if they were really going to be doing that, they wouldn't be so obvious about it.
Yeah.
So I just think it's a way that they've created this to make people fear that, so it pushes them back towards government, that the government can clearly see there's a lot of mistrust. No one trusts politicians anymore. So we need a threat to bring in something that makes you fear that, so you trust the government to take care of that problem.
Yeah. So let's look at, we'll look at the global, the things on more of a global scale. But let's look at something that we can locally fight back at, fight back at right now, and that's 15-minute cities. Because and this is something like I'd heard of a 15-minute city, maybe 6 months ago. I think it might something that kind of came to light.
Same here. I've only just started really hearing about 15, or before 15-minute cities, I was aware of the term of smart cities.
Yeah.
And then that's evolved into 15-minute cities.
Yeah. But there's other names for it as well. You've got 20-minute neighborhoods, and you've got a newer one I heard was low emissions neighborhood or a low neighborhood. And they're being trialed all over the place.
You know what? I've been to one of these type places where I can see what the 15-minute cities are, because I went to the Excel Centre in London a few months back, and they've got like a little, like, it's all like built up around there. You've got flats, but the flats, you've got like the shops underneath the flats. You've got a gym there, and you've got a rail system, a DLR just there. You've got, and it's, everything is within distance of everything you'd need, like working at home, shops to go shopping in local just underneath your flats, and gym and fitness stuff that you've got on your doorstep. And then there's no need to drive anywhere because you've got a Docklands Light Railway.
Yeah. Well, let's explain this to people. So if you've never heard of 15-minute city, a quick search will probably tell you that it's an urban planning concept in which most necessities and services can be reached with a 15 or 20-minute walk or bike ride, and that includes the return journey as well. So you're talking like 7.5-minute walk, and it's from any point in a town or city. And the idea is to like develop a polycentric city where there are like mini centers rather than one large center. There's a guy called Carlos Moreno. He talked about chrono urbanism, or like a new urban planning theory that proposes to organize cities around the concept of time. It's just in this way, like if you've got everything you need within a 15-minute radius or 10-minute radius, then you're going to stay in your little bubble.
Yeah.
In other words, let's
want to move out, and if you had, like, for example, okay, and in the centre of your 15-minute city, there's a giant park area. So if you wanted to get somewhere in nature, you just go out to the giant park area.
Yeah, and this sounds okay so far, doesn't it? It's sort of like, oh,
idyllic.
Let's stop wasting all this time on traveling, and it sounds great. Work from home or work, 5-minute walk away, that kind of thing. I can get everything I need. I can go to the park. I've got all facilities. Whatever I want is just here. But there are like potential benefits to having, like, to living within a 15-minute city or 20-minute neighborhood. For one, like when people have everything they need within a short bike ride, they're just less likely to rely on cars or transportation. So, that'll lead to a reduction in air pollution and traffic congestion. So, that's good for the environment. Everyone kind of agrees that, yeah, that would be good. Less pollution is always good. Definitely a tick in the box for climate change agenda and net zero targets if you subscribe to that. But more importantly, when people are able to walk or bike to their destination, wherever it is, they get more exercise. This is in theory, right? Because I'll tell you in a sec. So they get more exercise and more fresh air, promoting, the idea is that it promotes healthy and sustainable living, potentially reducing obesity, heart disease, other chronic health conditions. And assuming that they don't work from home, of course, because in which case, if you work from home and you live in a little bubble like this, then you just become agoraphobic.
Yeah.
And then you just spend every day of your life in your house eating food. You become obese, and then you get all of these health problems that they want you to, that they think a 15-minute city will stop you from getting. You'll end up with mobility problems and all sorts. So yeah. So I think it seems like there's positives to it, but when you think about human behavior, if you make everything very easy to get to, then we just get lazy, don't we?
Yeah, and I kind of think that you can see the concepts of this that have already been done before. If you look Thamesmead, very built up area, shops on your doorstep, park area there, and that's kind of degraded because of people living on top of each other. It doesn't really, they don't get on. It causes social problems with such close proximity of everyone living like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you just get urban slums.
So you're saying that people don't want to see the neighbors 24/7, and that they're assuming that communities can all live together in harmony and it's all great and rosy.
But they can't. I mean, you look at a block of flats. I once lived in a block of flats. There was, I think, 6 flats within it. There was one bad one in that flat, ruined the whole block for everybody.
Hmm. Yeah.
and you're just going to have it, noise problems and neighbour disputes, everyone on top of each other. I think it's in what you describe as, oh, nice and idyllic and nice, but no, because you're putting a social mix of people together, aren't you? Some from different backgrounds and different classes. I'm not trying to be snobby or anything here, but it's like you can see it on the housing estates where you'll have like a percentage of social housing mixed in amongst the private owned housing, and it all just goes to shit as a general rule because of the
Well,
smaller level of social housing that they've got there. And I know it's sounding snobby, but from my experience, you have these areas that just you can tell, like the areas where they're not caring about their house or anything. You can see like you have the electric meter covers ripped off the front of their houses, and
mhm,
they'll have like the bin overflowing where there's
yeah.
like a different standard of acceptance, maybe.
Well, the two things I'd say about that, because where I used to live when I was a kid, was on an estate where um, there was one street which was privately owned street. The rest of it wasn't, and there was one street which was horrendous, right?
Yeah.
Like people on drugs, like having bad trips and all sorts, like walking around the streets half naked and stuff, like going, "Ah!" and then what they've done it, they've knocked most of that place down now and rebuilt it all into a different setup. And what they did was they
Yeah.
moved all of these families that were living together, troubled families you might call them, all living in one
All up.
sort of, well, yeah, split them all up all over the place. Now I'm looking at where I live in this town. I remember me mum and dad, that when they first moved here, I remember them commenting saying that uh, this it's a little bit odd because you don't gen. There's one area which is mainly private bought, but the rest of the place is a real mix of private and social housing as well. So and so you don't, yeah. So from where I live, it's not that bad. Like my neighbors, my house, I own my house, but my neighbors either side are both council. I get on really well with my neighbours. It's like the whole street's pretty good. Everyone's nice to each other. It's not really a problem, but it's a real mix, the whole street, and you get that in most other streets where I live as well in the town. So yeah,
I
uh,
think it all depends as well. It's the broken windows policy, isn't it?
mm,
If an area isn't maintained to a nice high standard with rubbish all cleaned up regularly,
yeah,
graffiti removed, then they degrade into like rubbish areas. Thamesmead
yeah,
is very futuristic. This is like one of the towns of the future. I mean, it was in Clockwork Orange. It was filmed around in Thamesmead because it looked futuristic at the time.
hmm.
And then if you look at that now, it's just a concrete hellhole full of social problems
Well, it's
because
probably,
they let
yeah,
it
the
kind
way
of
they bought it.
degrade. They never kept the upkeep up, and it was just badly designed.
Yeah, either way they've built it and everything exactly. But you tend to find that more in cities as well, don't you? Like towns, and you know maybe people have got a little bit more space. People have got gardens and stuff. You're not on top of each other. Less problems in cities with, as you say, people living in flats, and it can, you can end up with more problems. But with these 15-minute cities, right? They say things like um, a 15-minute city can also help to reduce energy consumption and waste.
Yeah.
So when people have access to local food and businesses and everything else they want, they're just less likely to travel long distances or to shop or eat. But wait, if everyone is working from home or working 2 seconds down the road,
Mhm.
um, especially for people working from home, we're likely to see an increase in energy consumption
Yeah.
because you've got, instead of having one business that has a load of people in there working using the electricity, you're now using the same sort of amounts of electricity in your own home. So everyone's kind of distributed around using electricity in one home. I'm pretty sure it's cheaper or less energy will be used, one building being switched on with a billion computers in, than each individual home where you're boiling the kettle, you're you're charging your laptop, you've got the TV on, whatever. I don't know. I think it's additional cost to people and not to businesses. I think that's the difference.
But also, if you want to have a city built where everything is accessible to you within a 7-minute walk, then that's a lot of people that you're going to have to cram into a small area in order for that to work. And that's when you risk urban decay. All it's going to take is a few baddens, and you turn that area into a war zone.
Yeah. But hold on. Let's look at the positives. Back to positives. More people might have even more time to spend with family and friends. So more time for family and friends, more time for hobbies, more time to relax, leading to possibly a greater sense of community and belonging and improvement to people's well-being and mental health.
Okay, well, there is quite a few positives there.
But governments around the world are looking for ways to become more sustainable with, net zero agenda and all this. So this 50-minute concept is something that is gaining traction. So in 2020, Paris became the first major city to adopt a 15-minute city plan. But I had a look at what cities are doing it, right? And we've got, so get this, this is all over the world. This is unreal. This is not just, we're doing it over here in England, just testing a new thing out. This is something that's cropped up everywhere. And this seems to be a bit of a theme at the minute where if something happens in one place, it's happening everywhere across the world. So do we already have a global I don't know what to call it, a global government that is directing, that is testing things out? Because we've got, so let me just go through it. We've got Paris, France, where they created more public spaces. They were expanding public transportation system, and they were they're trying to reduce car traffic. Now in Paris is hellish for traffic. So it all sounds good. It all sounds like, that's good. Yeah, 15-minute concept in Paris might help. Also, you've got Copenhagen in Denmark. They're doing the same sort of thing, creating green spaces, expanding the transportation system as well, so that people use public transport rather than their own stuff, trying to reduce the car traffic. Exactly the same thing in Barcelona, Spain. They're looking to create like a more sustainable, livable city in a 15-minute bubbles. The same thing though, public transport, more green spaces, reducing car traffic. Melbourne, Australia, doing exactly the same thing. Vancouver in Canada, New York City in the US. How do you pronounce this? Sao Paulo in Brazil. Cape Town in South Africa. Seoul in South Korea. The Netherlands, Canada, Japan, Singapore, China, Brazil. I think I've already said Brazil. Mexico City, Germany, Italy, Austria, New Zealand, and let's focus on the United Kingdom here, right? So we've got Brazil, Bristol. They're working to create a 50-minute city. I've heard bad things about Bristol because people get fined and all sorts. If you just drive into a zone by accident, slapped with a fine. I mean, it's a great way for the local authority to make a bit of money, but horrendous for residents and people visiting the town or the city. You got Sheffield, so they're going to create a 15-minute neighborhood throughout the city over the next 20 years. So they've got like a really long-term plan on doing this.
What frustrates me about this, that, oh my God, reduce pollution, stop people needing to jump in their cars and things. I've always said, if you're serious about this, why does it cost me like 40, well, depending on what time I go, it could cost me up to £50 to travel from where I live into London by train. But if I jump in my car, it's like, what, a tenner of fuel, if that? And I can car share it. So if they were serious, why don't they make a government-owned transportation system, a combination of trains and buses the users will pay a monthly subscription, say £50 a month. Then that enables you to use any bus, train, or tram or anything like that to go anywhere within the country at any time. Why would I get in my car and drive everywhere, particularly if there was a bus running down my road or at the top of my road, would run past there every 10 minutes? I'd walk up to the end of the road, jump on the bus and go where I needed to, and then be back, and I wouldn't have to spend out on a car.
Yeah.
If I finance a car, I wouldn't have to pay petrol, tax, insurance. I'll pay all that onto a £50 subscription for travel anywhere. I'd go to like more places around the country. I'd go to Scotland for the weekend for free.
Yeah.
And then I'd spend money staying in the hotels and the local businesses there.
And that, what you're saying, sounds like an awesome idea. I
Yeah,
think that would be
that's
absolutely brilliant. But you know what they would
freedom.
do instead? Instead of doing what you say, right? Because that, to me, I'm pretty sure you could get enough revenue, or whatever you call it, that you would get enough money in, enough funds to be able to run a whole system, pay everybody good wages and all of that, right? If everybody subscribed to it. They wouldn't do that. What they would do instead is they would go, here are the current ticket prices, bus fares, and all of that. Right. So that's set in stone because that is the current price. What we'll do instead is we'll up the price of petrol and fuel
Yeah.
and force people to use public transport because it really will be cheaper.
Exactly. And you're like, you could come up with a solution to the. I mean, why would I get in my car to drive everywhere if you had regular running buses? That you'd have double the amount of buses on the road, and because of less cars and less congestion, buses would run more freely throughout the towns. I
Yeah.
wouldn't need, and that's like my £50. That's all I've got to pay. Why would I drive? Why would I spend all that money on a car? Where at the moment, if say for example I want to have a little pop down to Canterbury, by car it's a nightmare getting through there because of the traffic. Parking costs you a fortune, but then it's still cheaper than jumping on a train.
Yeah. Canterbury have got plans for it as well. Mind you, in Canterbury, you're probably already kind of like that anyway. But they're making they're creating more pedestrian and bicycle friendly streets.
It's I used to go Canterbury College back in the 90s, and it used to be a very open area, a nice little town to walk through. And when you go there now, it's so built up. They've built over and built up loads of shops around there. It's ruined the area. It's too built up now.
Well, they're doing the same in places like Sheffield, Ipswich, Oxford, Birmingham, Bristol. I've already said Bristol. Manchester, Leeds, Glasgow, Newcastle, Liverpool, Edinburgh. And all of these places, right, have got the same they've got the same idea. It's like create more green spaces, improve public transport, reduce car traffic. That's the kind of the main sort of goal. It seems like reducing car traffic is the thing. The problem is I've heard other stories as well where they'll block roads off. They'll pick up big heavy planters, dump them in the middle of a road, and go, no one can drive down there now.
Yeah.
And then residents end up getting really annoyed, and they've ended up like attaching a rope around it and dragging it away. But what they then start to do, you say, here's the whole problem I've got with it. They don't say let's incentivize. You just like sort of incentivized people to use public transport. Like this is going to be much cheaper for you. It's a scheme that you can subscribe to, be monthly payment, blah blah blah. Right, it's dead easy, and instead of using your car, just use public transport. There you go, and effectively it'll feel like it's free because you can go anywhere at any time, wherever you want. Right.
Yeah.
But what they seem to be doing instead is shoving cameras up everywhere. And then if you don't adhere to the rules that they've set, fine, you'll get fined. And then people feel like, what am I supposed to do about that? If you just get fined, you have to pay the fine. Otherwise, you have to pay more money.
Well, if you look at London, you don't need to drive a car if you live in central London. Jump on the tube, jump on a red bus. There's multiple options you've got. Now, if they brought the same model out to urban areas, they just don't want to do it. They'd rather cram everyone into a 15-minute city rather than use the existing infrastructure and just improve and work around it by creating better transport links.
Yeah.
If they were serious about climate crisis, they would instantly say, right, all public transport is free or it's a subscription-based service. If you're not a UK citizen, you obviously have to pay extra because you're not part of the paying public.
Uh-huh.
Or you've got the option, you can pay £50 a month. Why would I? And we're tripling the number of buses in your area. You can literally jump on a bus and be there without worrying about congestion, taxing my car. I mean, my car expense is it's £340 for the finance on it. The insurance has just gone up now, so it's about £50 a month insurance. So we're up to 390. It's like £20 a month to tax. So we're over £400 a month just to run a car.
Yeah.
Now, if you was to say £200 subscription to travel anywhere for free with that money, well, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
So long as they've got the I can get anywhere without there's certain places like now you have to have a car where I live because the buses aren't that frequent. There's hardly any of them, and it will just take you like an hour to get into the town centre, where my car would take me 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's my thoughts on 15-minute cities. I think it's a ludicrous idea that the best thing they should do is improve the transportation system and make it either free or affordable subscription service to go anywhere in the country.
Yeah, well, I would say that is part of a 50-minute city plan to improve the transportation. So that's a good thing. But there also just one last thing I want to mention about this, right? Because there are some pitfalls, obviously, but how can a 50-minute city be used by the government, by a government that has nefarious sort of ideas? And it's things like, just mentioned it before, instead of incentivizing this whole idea, they will punish you for not adhering to it, which means more cameras, which means increased surveillance, having people like need or having everything that people need within a walk or bike ride. They can monitor everyone's activities a little bit easier. You're in your bubble, everyone's safe now, compartmentalized, right? They'll have more cameras and probably cameras that have facial recognition technology, which means reduced privacy, and effectively increase control. Because by controlling businesses and services, the government they just control you, tell you where to be, where to go.
And also, if you can get everywhere you need to in 15 minutes is the idea, right? Well, my family live miles away from me, so what if they live in a different 15-minute city, or I've got friends in another 15-minute city because they live in a different area?
Yeah,
Where do I see them?
Don't worry, Kev. No, don't worry, because they will be allowed to have a few trips outside of your area a month.
Oh, that's nice of them. They can control when I go and visit and when.
Yeah, exactly. Increased control. And at the end of the day, this is kind of like social engineering. You're trying to make. I'm pretty sure, right, that people who people who don't people who have had a nice life, they've had everything quite easy, come up with these ideas because they see the world through through a particular lens, and they think this kind of thing will work.
Or it's a case of that's for the plebs, the masses. Well, they'll just leave me alone in my countryside where I don't have to put up with them flocking down to my nice little village because they're in their 15-minute cities, and I'm all right.
And this is another bad thing about it is increased segregation.
Yeah,
you are effectively splitting poorer areas up from other areas or wealthier areas, and you know what I mean. It's one of those things where I'm not sure that they thought it through all the way. I think the main goal of like a net zero goal is probably a blanket over the main goal of making money. Because they think about like the ultra low emission zone that Sadiq Khan has tried to implement in London. That is all about nothing to do with combating climate change or anything. That is all about making money. It's all about making money. And I think that's what this is as well.
Because his figures didn't add up to his pollution levels and things, did it? It didn't add up. So yeah, it's about money and control.
Yeah. So overall for me, I think being balanced, I could see how it could have benefits. But if it's implemented through punishments rather than incentives, then I think it ain't ever going to work. And what you'll do is wind people up. And people, in the UK, they'll take a lot, but there'll be a point when they just crack. And if you want to see social unrest, just continue with it.
Yeah, it's funny, as we're just talking, a bus has actually pulled up outside my house. That's a
What?
I know.
Personal bus service.
It's literally parked at the end of my driveway. I kid you not. What the hell is it doing?
Well, might as well jump on it, see where it goes.
No, I know where it goes. I don't want to be going there. Town centre.
That's it from us then.
Yeah, that was a long subject, actually, wasn't it?
It was actually, yeah.
Natural went from fears throughout the decades to 15-minute cities. I don't see this as a podcast. I see this more as a lecture.
Probably. Yeah. I think you're right, actually. So you've been listening to Kev and Steve on Nerds Talk. And you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Audible, Overcast, YouTube, Rumble, blah, blah, blah. And you can also find my stuff on stephensweeney.co.uk. Check out my comic book on bringcasefiles.com. Kev?
kevingroverfiction.co.uk. I've just started to revamp my website again, and I've got a new book that should be coming out very soon called Orion, and I'm currently working on one called The Wastelands, which is a nice little horror story.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thanks for joining us. See you later.
See you later.